Poetry by Marianne. Poetry is one of Moore's best known and most discussed poems. It provides an example of her famously ambiguous statements about poetry. She worked through this poem several times, and in the complete poems 1967, it was reduced to just the first 3 lines. However, most critics have disapproved of this revision. Summary: I also dislike this poetry. There are other things more important than this fiddle. When I read it with a perfect contempt for it, others may think that, after all, there is in it a place for the genuine. Hands that can grasp, eyes that can expand, and hair that can rise will find it is not because a high-sounding interpretation can be given to it, but because it is useful. If it is mere imitation of poetry and unintelligible, it is because we cannot admire what we cannot understand. Is there poetry in the bat hanging upside down to catch something to eat, in elephants pushing, in a wild horse rolling down, a wolf waiting to catch something upon a tree? The immovable critic is twinkling his skin like a horse moves its skin when a flea bites it. The baseball fan, the statistician, all find a place in poetry. Are not business, document, and school books a kind of poetry? Still, a distinction must be made. When half-poet claims that their words make poetry, who will believe them? Is it true that the autocrats are literalists of the imagination? Free from insolence and triviality, their poetry is imaginary gardens with real thoughts in them. Shall we ask for the raw material of poetry in all its rawness, and which poetry is genuine when we are interested in poetry? The author's indifference to poetry is revealed in the word fiddle. Poetry is a very silly thing. There are many other things more important than poetry. If we want to discover whether there is, after all, something genuine in poetry, we must look upon it with perfect contempt. Good poetry can move the hands to grasp, eyes to dilate, and raise the hair. The question is whether poetry is useful, not whether it merits a high-sounding interpretation. A derivative poetry or a mere imitation of poetry is quite unintelligible. We cannot appreciate it because we cannot understand it. Poetry can behave in strange ways, like a bat that hangs down by its leg instead of standing on its leg, or like elephants pushing, a wild horse rolling, a wolf waiting for something under a tree. A critic does not understand poetry and twitches his skin like a horse that feels a flea. Even business documents and school books can be considered as poetry. They are all important or useful like poetry, but we must beware of half-poet who exhibits bad poetry. The best thing to read and enjoy poetry is to search for its raw material in their rawness. That shows your real interest in genuine poetry. The poet moves between the feeling of praise and blame, between acceptance and rejection. There are yet valuable hints that poetry must be intelligible, that it should not deal in upside-down ideas or language, that it should not be eccentric like certain animals, it should not degrade to the level of school books and statistics. We must be beware of half-poets. The imagination is superior to literalness, that poetry is not an imaginary garden with real thoughts in it.